So recently, a lot of people have been sharing this theory relating to the Blood of the Dead outro and Richtofen's death around pretty much everywhere, Reddit, YouTube, and just, again, everywhere. And these have been some people that are actually pretty prominent in the zombies community. People like Mr. Dalek, Mr. Raffle Waffles, Johnny J. I think Rados, I could be mistaken about that one. But regardless, the point is a lot of prominent people have been sharing around this theory about the Richtofen inside the outro cutscene to Blood of the Dead, and the one that dies is not the Primis Richtofen that we've been playing as for the longest time, and he's pretty much not even Primis Richtofen to begin with, and he's some sort of imposter. And of course, I just gotta say this right away, I do not like this theory, and I honestly think it is very flawed in many ways, and I can think of 3 major things just in my head alone that can easily disprove this theory all on their own, but I will be bringing up all 3 of them. But one thing I want to mention before I get into all of this is that I'm not the first one to make a video disagreeing and making just people like disagreeing with the theory pretty much, and the first one to do that was Nick Saris. Now, I was actually making the video before I actually saw his video, but he did get out first, but unfortunately he took it down because he felt it was too critical of the people who made the theories and not the theory itself, which I could see, but at the same time I kind of wish he kept it up because he does make a couple good points that I actually wasn't aware of. But of course I believe that I could bring up the strongest ones, and of course that's going to be relating to a radio inside Blood of the Dead. But regardless, we'll get into all of that in a little bit. But first thing what I want to do is actually just do I guess a quick summary of what the theory is, because it's just for the people who don't know how this theory works. But I'll put a time on screen just to skip past this part if you guys already know what the theory is and actually understand it. But for the people who want a refresher or actually want to hear a quick summary of it, I'll actually explain right here. So how the theory is supposed to work is that Richtofen, at least in the Giant, did not have anything on his face. His face was completely clean, no scarring or anything like that. But of course, right after the Giant, when they left it, they actually went to the Reisendrache, and in the Reisendrache, in the outro cutscene, you could actually see that Richtofen now has a scar on his face, and this supposedly marks this Richtofen as the Richtofen that we will continue to play as through Black Ops 3, and just pretty much mark him as the Primis Richtofen, and all the other ones that don't have it are rather pre or before the Reisendrache or are a different Richtofen. That's of course how that's supposed to work apparently. But of course the major problem with this is that the Richtofen that we see in the intro to Blood of the Dead does not have this scar on his face, nor does the Richtofen that dies in the outro to Blood of the Dead either have the scar. And of course this is a problem with the scar because if you guys remember when Blood of the Dead is supposed to take place, it's supposed to be directly after Zetsubo no Shima, and of course before Zetsubo no Shima is the Reisendrache, and that's supposed to be where he got the scar, so he should still have the scar on his face inside Blood of the Dead. And what people are doing with this is saying, well, this isn't the same Richtofen, because if this was the same Richtofen that has been going through the cycle and through Blood of the Reisendrache to Zetsubo no Shima, then of course to pick up the blood from I guess Alcatraz, he would still have the scar. But that's just not the case in either of these intros or outros. And of course this is supposed to say that the Richtofen that we see without a scar that dies in the outro is no longer, or isn't the Primis Richtofen that we know and love, or something like that. Now that's pretty much how it goes. Of course there's people who actually explain the theory better because I mean they like the theory and stuff like that, but that's pretty much it, because they're saying that this isn't the same Richtofen because he should have the scar but he doesn't. So this proves that it is not the same Richtofen that we've been playing as. Now, as weak as that sounds, a lot of people believe it for some weird reason. I know I may sound a little bit worse than it actually is, but it's just a little bit worse. But regardless, basing everything off this scar is bad enough for me. I mean, I just have a hard time believing that one little detail on a character's face is good enough to prove anything at all. I mean, when I do theories personally, I need to make triple sure that this is correct. I need to make sure that I'm making a triangle every single time I make a theory, and that's why I have so many theories about the zombie storyline, but I never share them for that sole reason, that I do not feel like they are good enough or proper enough to share. And that's why when I do talk about them, I never name them theories, because I just don't feel like they have enough behind them. But the thing is, even with this scar, if you believe the scar is enough to prove that this is a different Richtofen, it still isn't enough to convince me, or, I mean, in fact, I think I could disprove it. But one thing that was actually brought up inside Nixaris' video is the scar itself has never been consistent. It has never always been or never been on Richtofen's face, because what he pointed out and what was surprising me is that if you look back to Origins, Richtofen had the scar on his face inside the intro and in game, or at least the thinking game, but at least in the intro. So why did he have the scar then if he got it inside the Reisendrache? Doesn't make too much sense. And what makes even less sense is that yes, he had the scar in Origins, but what's supposed to happen soon after that inside the Giant, which should be the same Richtofen, he does no longer have the scar in his face. So the scar was in Origins, then of course he went on his little journey, showed up in the Giant, and then he no longer had the scar. Kind of weird. And of course then he supposedly got the scar again inside the Reisendrache, and I find that quite strange. Now, of course, that's a major problem with all of this that a lot of people like to bring up, but that's not the only problem, not as inconsistent as a scar gets, because the thing is, there's a lot of other problems with it. First is that Richtofen does not have the scar in the comics. I mean, if it's that important, you would think that they would have the scar on his face if they wanted something of significance, or maybe it is something of significance, but we're understanding it incorrectly. But regardless, he doesn't have it in the comics, and, you know, it could be just a mistake on the writers, you could just say that, so let's ignore the comics. But the thing that kills me about this, and the one they try to explain, is the scarring on his face is no longer there in the intro or outro, but it's on his face in game. So Richtofen in game has a scar on his face. Of course, in game Blood of the Dead, that's what I mean. And I just don't get how you could explain this. I've heard people try it. It's all like, oh yeah, but that's because in the intro, that was fake Richtofen, but then when you started playing, there's a quick swap off, and this was now the Primis Richtofen we're used to. And then, for some reason, during the outro, there's a swap off again, and I don't know where the heck Primis Richtofen that we know and love went, but I guess he disappeared, and then another future version of himself was in the cryo chamber, and then went and killed the imposter, or the fake, or whatever you want to call him, Richtofen that sat down and took his blood from him. And I mean, I mean, that alone would disprove the theory for me. That is just so weak in so many ways. I mean, another thing is just using the Occam's razor, Occam's law, or whatever you want to call it. I mean, this takes so many assumptions. It's actually ridiculous to even consider this if you're using Occam's razor. It's just like, what, excuse me? I mean, and that's the major point Nixaris was making in this video, and I completely agree with it. And again, either of these things, if you use Occam's razor, or even just see how inconsistent the scar is enough to disprove this theory, at least to me. But the thing is, it's not where it ends, because I think I can definitively, at least again, as much as you can for the zombie storyline, disprove this theory. And this all stems from, where did the imposter Richtofen come from? Like, actually, don't you think we would have known about this, heard about this, or something? I mean, don't you think that something at the very least? I mean, even if not, okay, let's see where possibly this imposter Richtofen could have came from. And I actually have one person try to explain, I can't remember who said it, but they said, well, maybe it's that innocent soul Richtofen that Richtofen got after getting the summoning key in Shadows of Evil. And I'm just thinking to myself, well, that's a huge leap of faith and assumption, but okay, let's assume that's the case. Well, this actually, even if it is this Richtofen, his blood won't work, because you have to remember why he's actually taking the blood from his body in the first place inside the outro, because his blood is full of ether, and using his blood they can make holes inside this dimension and be able to escape this dimension. That is why they're taking his blood from him, and this is made clear by the warden right before you actually get into the boss fight. He's explaining that he wants to use our character's blood to, of course, use it to open portals to other universes or dimensions, timelines, whatever you want to call them, to invade those ones and corrupt them and bring Armageddon to them. And still, I want to bring something up that will definitively prove that this Richtofen's blood will not work. And it's a radio from Maxis that you can find inside Blood of the Dead, which I'll play for you guys right now.
Yes, greetings, Herr Doctor. I have managed to use part of your sample to boost the signal of my transmissions. However, I have yet to receive any reply from your end. I pray that I am not too late. New findings have come to light. Yes, the moment one travels through a portal powered by element 115, their blood is changed. The evidence is conclusive. Today, I have discovered that the effect is actually cumulative. The more one travels through the ether, the more they absorb into their bodies. While undeath does not appear to ever be a risk, the potency of one's etheric cells increases. The blood of the prisoners you sampled and that of your now frozen compatriots contained trace but significant amounts. But your blood, Edvard, you have traveled through countless realities of space and time. Your blood is not only beyond potent, I fear it is a profound liability. We both know there are forces who would stop at nothing to attain such power. You must do all you can to keep it from them, Richtofen. Unless, of course, they already have you, and then all is lost. Richtofen! I now believe that either you have been killed or you are currently trapped in a pocket dimension. Worst case, imprisoned by those who mean to undo existence. In the off chance that you are still on the move, I may have a solution. The power of your blood could theoretically be used to open a portal and escape your present reality. If you can direct and focus enough energy through your blood, you may be able to tear a hole through the ether and step through. How much blood will be required, I do not know. But given the concentration of ether in your veins, it's likely best to not overdo it.
So in this radio, you could actually hear why Richtofen's blood can even open portals from this dimension, this Alcatraz dimension, into other ones. And it's because Richtofen has traveled so much through the ether that his blood has really been contaminated with the ether and has become very powerful because of that. And if he uses his blood, he can actually open portals in the ether or just anywhere and teleport to different places, and that's how his blood actually works and actually opens the portals in the outro cutscene. And how this disproves the theory more than anything is because, okay, we have some imposter Richtofen that did not travel through countless dimensions like Max has said. And if he did, if this imposter Richtofen somehow traveled through a bunch of different timelines and just went through the ether and contaminated his blood with ether, we would have heard of that. We heard of what Primis Richtofen did in his travels. He went all over the place. He went to Shadows of Evil, the original timeline, Dimension 63, Argartha, multiple times, even the Fractures. He's been traveling through so many different dimensions that his blood has definitely been contaminated with the ether. But the other Richtofen, or this supposed imposter Richtofen, never did that. And if he did, I mean, that's again another huge leap of faith to believe that for some reason we didn't hear about another Richtofen traveling through the ether all over the place, and that is just a ridiculous, huge leap of faith. Of course, I can't definitively, but I think this is as definitive as you can get to disprove a theory, because it's ridiculous to think that this random imposter Richtofen's blood is also super contaminated with the ether like Primis Richtofen's blood, because we would have heard about this. We would have definitely heard about another imposter Richtofen traveling through a bunch of different dimensions countless times like Maxis says. And I just find it a bit ridiculous, especially after hearing this radio, to actually believe this theory still. I mean, again, there's the absolute slimmest possibility that this theory is correct, but it is just so unlikely. It's actually ridiculous that so many people are sharing this theory, and to base it off a scar, I mean, I find it a bit much. I mean, I find it a very, I find it a bit of a leap of faith, a huge stretch. I just don't know. There's a lot of problems with this theory, but I do want to make one thing clear right away. I do not believe that the scar is insignificant. I actually do believe the scar is very, very significant, but I do think that looking at it in this way and interpreting it this way is the incorrect way to do so, because I do think that just like the bullet that you can actually see on Nikolai's armor, where of course the future version of himself, or I guess, yeah, the future version of himself gets shot right there. I also believe that has a significance, just like you see blood on Richtofen's hands, scar on his face, and all that stuff. I do believe they have some sort of significance and meaning that we are just unaware of, or it's something that's so minor that it doesn't actually matter, or something like that. And maybe it's a mistake by Treyarch, or just them being inconsistent and applying the right models. But again, I just want to make that clear that I personally do think that the scar has some sort of significance, because of the sole reason that it makes no sense for them to have the scarred version of Richtofen inside a cutscene, even, I mean, just to confuse us. I mean, if you have the scarred version of Richtofen's model, why not use them to get rid of that confusion that it created in the first place? Like, why would you actually leave it in there? Of course, I don't think if for the reasons people are saying is the reason why it's the case, but I do believe it has some sort of meaning that we're just unaware of currently. And my last and major problem that I want to bring up with this theory is that I really feel like that, since this is probably wrong, it really takes away from the storyline. I mean, this was supposed to be a huge moment for Richtofen, and this is the video I actually want to make and will be making sometime soon, is just how hard this cutscene was to make for the story, and how difficult this, how much this affects the storyline, to say the very least, on an emotional level at the very least. I mean, it both in the storyline itself, but also on an emotional level. I do want to make a separate video talking about this, but this, if this is a Primis Richtofen, I mean a fake Richtofen, imposter Richtofen from some random universe that who knows where, I mean, that would just destroy this cutscene entirely. I mean, it's not even worth it. Why even do this? It just makes no sense to do this. I mean, it actually doesn't. If it was as insignificant as maybe the intro to the Giant, then it would have been made like that. They wouldn't have actually focused so much on this. I mean, I just find it a bit ridiculous, and I think if it is true that, I'm going to be pretty upset, but I just don't think they would do that, just based on, you know, just because I think it'd be bad storytelling. But anyways, that's all I really have to say about this. Tell me your thoughts and opinions on this whole theory. Did I disprove the theory? Did I bring you guys enough information or evidence to disprove it? You still believe it? And tell me why you disagree with me. Maybe I'm the one mistaken and missing information or something like that. But I find that quite doubtful, because, I mean, I've been watching their videos, reading their Reddit posts, and I just cannot find the definite proof or the definitive proof that these are imposter Richtofens. Anyways, that's all I gotta say. If you guys did enjoy the video, go ahead, do all the normal YouTube stuff, like, subscribe, bell, share, and especially bell. But I'm gonna go, and I'll catch you guys in the next stream or video.